for listeners that don't know, what was kind of the claim to fame for the Balaban clan?
Well, I was actually raised in a very sort of average Midwestern, nicely to-do family, but with very little awareness of being in a show business family, but it was nonetheless, a show business family. My grandmother in 1908 bought a Nickelodeon in Chicago. She and my grandfather and my dad's brothers, who were older than he was, had a little delicatessen in a slum called Maxwell Street, which was kind of the Lower East Side of Chicago. And my grandmother decided to get into the movie business because as a delicatessen owner, she said, the lettuce gets old, you throw it out. With the movie, it gets old, you send it back, and they send you a new one. And there's no credit. In their grocery store business, my grandfather was sort of a pushover, and everybody would sort of sign up for the lox or bagels or whatever one bought in those days as a delicatessen. And at the end of the month, he had real trouble collecting because he was a nice man and he didn't like to bother people who didn't have enough money to pay him quickly. So my grandmother also said, in the movie business, there's no credit. You pay a nickel, you go in. It's called a Nickelodeon. There's no debt. Within the next 15 years, they had 80 picture palaces in and around the Chicago area. It was the largest chain of theaters in the Midwest. In about 1933 or 4, I believe, my dad's oldest brother, Barney Balaban, took over Paramount from Adolph Zucker and ran it for about 35 years.
With your background and everything, did you ever consider anything else but working in entertainment?
Well, I never really considered working in entertainment, given that, it really didn't seem an option to me. It was all very distant. Paramount, which the studios were in Los Angeles. My Uncle Barney lived in New York, and Paramount's executive headquarters were always in New York for God knows what reason. I guess they didn't want to be in California. The biggest difference in my life growing up, and the thing that made me the most aware of having a family that was related to show business, and don't forget, it felt like exhibition and distribution, and it didn't feel creative because I wasn't around it. But the biggest change in my life because of this was I got to go to all movies for free in Chicago, which was nice. It didn't exactly make me think I would run out and start acting in a movie at some point. I always loved pretending. I was a puppeteer from the age of 4. I started with hand puppets because they're easier. Grew to marionettes, which do get tangled. That's their main downside. But I loved putting on puppet shows. I wrote them. I performed in them. Sometimes I did away with the puppets and walked into my little puppet stage. I was very small myself and performed some of my own avant-garde plays, which of course I had no idea were avant-garde, but looking back on it, they probably were somewhat existentialist. And was always interested in it, but never really thought I'd do anything. I was in the plays at school, etc. Probably thought maybe I would be a writer of some kind. But I did study at Second City in Chicago when I was about 16, I think, and took a wonderful weekly improvisational class for kids, for teenagers, basically, that a woman named Viola Spallin ran. She was basically the mother of improvisational theater. She wrote the book, literally the book, Theater Games, I think it's called. She was Paul Sills' mother and was very much behind the whole improvisation movement, and I was lucky enough and had no idea how sort of seminal this woman's work and teachings were, to have her be my teacher when I was a kid. And it was very formative, I think.
Now, I know Chicago is very much a theater town. When did you decide to kind of make that jump from theater into film?
Well, Chicago, when I was growing up, there really wasn't much of a theater town. As I left Chicago to go to Colgate University and then NYU, that's when Gary Sinise was starting Steppenwolf, and a bunch of other really interesting theater companies were starting up. It always had Goodman Theater, but mostly Chicago as a theater town was known for some really fun dinner theaters. The Ivanhoe Dinner Theater, the Candlelight, I think it was called. There was a lot of dinner theater, but it was not a sophisticated theater town particularly, except when I left. I don't know if they were waiting for me to leave. I'm not sure, but that did happen. So I was in after, indirectly because of my experience at Second City, a girl there, a friend of mine, said, well, why don't you audition to be an apprentice in summer stock? Which I did. I never really even knew what summer stock was. But I went with her, I can't remember her name, I wish I could, to Southern Illinois, a place called Guy Little Jr.'s Theater on the Square in Sullivan, Illinois, and auditioned to be an apprentice, which meant that you paid them like $50 a week, and you got to work morning, noon, and night, moving scenery, building props, acting in the children's musicals, and sometimes getting little parts in the regular equity productions. And I did that the summer after my senior year of high school, and then went to Colgate University, and then transferred to NYU and somehow connived getting an audition in my junior year of college to an off-Broadway musical called You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. And I was in the original cast playing the part of Linus, the genius kid with the blanket. And then I didn't decide to be in movies or anything, but because I was in a very successful off-Broadway play, and, all the casting directors come to see it at Marion Doherty's office, and Juliet Taylor probably specifically. They cover all these things, and I got cast in The Midnight Cowboy and Catch-22, which were my first movies, and I was cast when I was, a senior in college, probably, and managed to do those two movies, and then have gone on to have whatever my career is. That was the taking off place for stuff.
When did you get involved in Altered States, and was Ken Russell already on the project when you were attached to it, or
no,
did he come aboard later?
Yeah, no. Altered States was originally directed by Arthur Penn, the wonderful director who did Bonnie and Clyde and many other good things. Arthur was great. He was a good friend of Patty Chayefsky and Howard Gottfried, who was the producer of Altered States. It was a very tight little New York circle of really smart, really wonderful filmmakers and writers, and they were all very close with each other. So it was a big rupture when they sort of fired Arthur. For what reasons exactly, I don't know. I know a lot of the production had to be done out of California because they didn't, I don't think, had the special effects. In fact, they probably still don't in New York. All the master artists and all that sort of stuff seemed to be in Los Angeles and California at the time. And it's possible that Arthur, who was a very, very dedicated New Yorker, as was Patty, actually, nobody wanted to be in California, as Sidney Lumet was basically in that fraternity. It's possible that Arthur just neglected his, I have to go to California now, to oversee all these complicated effects and production meetings and stuff. I think that's what it had to do with. But whatever it was, they fired him and really wanted to make the movie, had us cast. And the four of us in the cast had already been cast by Arthur, Bill Hurt, Blair Brown, and Charlie Hayden, and myself, and they wanted to keep the cast. And it was relatively close to when we were supposed to make the movie, and they came in and happily announced we found Ken Russell. And he is a genius. I mean, I love him, as I probably hope I've said already, but was not used to the kind of community and kind of communal effort that making a movie was for Howard and Patty, and would have been for Arthur, and this was not something that he felt. I don't think he felt comfortable with it, and he got rid of them all as quickly as he could when he started shooting. I mean, he managed to distance himself from them. I shouldn't say he got rid of them. He sort of created circumstances that made them kind of back off.
I like the chemistry between those four main characters. What was that working relationship like with you guys?
Well, Bill Hurt, who I had known, I think, peripherally in New York as we were both sort of young actors in New York, Bill reached out to me when we were cast and said, let's hang out together because our characters are friends and let's try to be friends. And we were. It was very nice. I enjoyed him. We all got to know each other. And I think that probably added to the feeling of chemistry. Blair Brown, I don't know if I knew her much, but, also as a New York actor, we all kind of hung out together a bit. Nothing extraordinary, but, I mean, we naturally all became friends and are still we don't hang out together particularly because we all live in different places, but I consider Blair and Bill still friends of mine. When I occasionally see them, I'm very happy to see them. And if I were in New York more, we probably would have lunch together once in a while. Charlie Hayden, I liked very much, stayed in California, and I never really got to know him too much. I think there must have been maybe a feeling of us banding together since the production was very fractious, but not in front of us. But, I mean, we knew what was going on. And I think probably that might have aided, helped us bond a little bit more. We also had a 4-week rehearsal period, which always in theater is definitely one of the ways that actors really get to know each other, because you're at rehearsal, but then you're having lunch, and you're on your way to rehearsal, and then you hang out afterwards, as opposed to just being in a movie when you might show up on the first day of work, have a key scene with the person playing your best friend. You've never met them, and you never see them again, and you see them, a couple of hours a day for over a period of months, but it doesn't necessarily become a friendship. Theater kind of breeds that, and the rehearsal period for Altered States being a very theater-like rehearsal period, at least consistently, we did it every day for about a month, probably led to this bonding thing, perhaps. And also, we kind of knew that Ken Russell we sensed that he wasn't really going to fit in, and what's going to happen when Patty's around all the time. Because he wasn't a person who liked being told what to do or having anybody look over his shoulder, which they, from his point of view, that's what they were doing. From their point of view, that's what they always did, because they were friends, and it was a communal event. For Ken, it was the opposite. And we probably sensed that happening, and we probably got a little tighter because we did feel we were on a bit of a rocky ship.
Sometimes that friction, that butting of heads, can just be a terrible thing to be around, and sometimes you can really get some great creative things that come out of it. What do you feel? Was there a half and half, or just was it miserable?
I don't think it helped anything be more creative. I don't think it necessarily hurt it all that much, because we weren't around it. It was a very distinct breaking away, because on the first day of shooting, I probably described this already. I have this dim memory of telling you things that I don't usually talk about too much, but I guess it's okay, and everybody's dead now and all that. Yeah, on the first day of shooting, Ken and Patty got into an argument over the fact that we were all pretending to be drunk, or in some cases actually drinking, during a reunion, my wife being heavily pregnant, maybe 8 or 9 months pregnant, my movie wife, and it was probably not the right thing to do, to be drunk when we were scientists, and probably knew that you shouldn't be doing this when your wife was pregnant. And there was, we heard that a fight was going on in the trailer, and then after lunch, Patty flew back to New York, and about 8 or 9 executives in limousines came to watch what was unfolding, which was really lively and interesting, and probably could have been good for the movie, but was not very good for the pocketbooks, wasn't good for the emotional health of the executives, probably, I would say. And then the movie went on with Patty remaining in New York and us doing the movie in Los Angeles. If there were to be dialogue changes, Patty had to be consulted. He had a Dramatist Guild contract, which was rare. I don't think any other writer that I've ever known had the ability to legally not have his words changed or her words changed in the movie. But what Patty didn't have was control of the visuals. So Ken could do whatever he wanted with the visuals, and he was very creative. But, some of what he was doing was a kind of a fuck you to Patty. Look, it's my movie. I can do what I want. And some of it was just the fact that Ken had a wonderful, rather outrageous and amazing imagination, and didn't feel like being constricted by what Patty wrote in stage directions. So there was a lot of unhappiness on Patty's part from the interesting but very, very not what Patty intended visuals for the movie.
I went back and I read a lot of reviews of the film that were written at the time, and
I don't remember. Did it get good or bad reviews? I have no idea.
Not too many good ones, a lot of bad ones.
Yeah.
A lot of criticism about the speed of the dialogue. And
really? Well, did I mention that to you? I can't remember. One of the things that Ken could do was have us talk very quickly. I'm not sure if he did it just to annoy Patty, but it certainly annoyed Patty. But I think he felt he was hindered by the words in the movie. And if he could only obliterate the words, it would be a more visceral visual experience. And his way of obliterating the words was to encourage everybody to speak at lightning speed if they could.
A few years prior, you had been in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which was just rife with special effects, and so was Altered States. How was that different for you as far as the experience of working with all those special effects?
Well, it was completely different. First of all, in Altered States, I was only involved in a couple of the special effect sequences, and somewhat peripherally, so I really didn't live through the tedium of blue screen and endless, concern about edges of frames and things. So I really wasn't involved in that too much. And don't forget, Altered States, 70% of it took place in the real world, it was only when he started to change and have psychedelic experiences and also literally physically changed Bill Hurt's character that then it became special effects. Close Encounters was living inside of a special effect. Once we got to the area where the mothership was going to land on the top of Devil's Tower, we lived in the studio. We were always in some form of a special effect or not. And also, Close Encounters was definitely Steven Spielberg wrote the movie, directed the movie, produced the movie. It was his concept. And Steven is a wizard at technical things, aside from being a wonderful director of actors and many other things. So there was a very harmonious, it may have been lengthy and somewhat boring at times, but we were always in a tightly run ship run by a loving, happy director who had written the movie, and there was no conflict of any kind during it. Altered States was quite different in terms of the special effects. Ken would sometimes get an idea, for instance, to front light something that could only be backlit, or vice versa. Bill Hurt had to wear a costume in which you could see his veins kind of pulsating with this kind of colorful blood effect, having to do with his DNA transformation, at the molecular level, as I remember it dimly. And I think Dick Smith, combined with another person, Dick Smith did special effects makeup at Amazing Creations, and masks and things for Bill to change into. And some of the stuff was super reflective, and it needed lights to be on it, but not behind it. And Ken kind of shot it with whatever way he felt like, and then they had to kind of fix it in post. So that wasn't something I experienced, but I heard about it and I knew about it. But in some cases, it just made the movie a little more expensive. And maybe Ken was going for a wonderful lighting effect that turned out to be worth it in the end. But in Steven's case, he had a plan. They had production meetings. Everybody was very much together on the same page, special effect wise. And in Altered States, the special effects were somewhat of a fractured page because of having a director who was much more used to his own, I would say, kind of big, though some of Ken's movies were. They were very auteurish, and they were very much more of a kind of off-Broadway experience. This is fun. Let's do this now. Let's change here. Let's go there, which is a wonderful way to make a movie, but doesn't work out well in a movie that has a huge amount of technical effects where everything has to be planned and organized to be efficient and to be effective.
You famously kept a diary for Close Encounters. Is that something that you maintained since then?
No. I would never really do it again for many different reasons. Also, my diary for Close Encounters sometimes was letters home to my wife, and I extracted, some of the material from that. It wasn't all that I wrote at the time. But really, aside from the fact that rarely in a movie do you have, is it, at the time anyway, the most successful, financially most successful movie in the history of movies. But where would you find Francois Truffaut being the star of the movie, and you got to stand with him all the time? Steven, this was the second of his big blockbuster movies in a career, as we know, of 25 or 30 of them, but seminal to his work. And it was just so interesting, the effects, the success of the movie, the wonderfulness of the movie. That's unusual. In most movies, there's not really all that much to write about that anybody would want to hear about. And also, I didn't want to ever be known as the actor who was the mole who was writing down everything, so be careful what you say in front of them, or don't invite him to the party because we can't have this, we can't have this written up and, in whatever he's doing next. So it really was a once-in-a-lifetime thing for me. I've written briefly, I wrote a chapter of a book, I forget what it's called. It's really a fun book written by a wonderful actor, Andrew McCarthy, does travel books, and he wrote a book about being on location with a movie, and I wrote a chapter about being on location with the Mexican, and everybody wrote a kind of a chapter about an interesting experience they had while being traveling on a movie. But other than that, and I wouldn't consider that about the movie, it was definitely just about me and my travel experience in Mexico, which was interesting and fun, but very, very little about the creative parts of the movie. I don't want to be known as a spy.
Be careful what you say. Balaban's on set today.
Yep.
I'm curious, did you ever see the parody film Closet Cases of the Nerd Kind?
No, never heard of it. Are we all in it?
Pretty much, yeah. There's a really good, a lot of guys with beards, and yeah, I'll have to send Peter a link.
I would enjoy that. I know we were parodied. I've been happy. I love being. I mean, I'm just a small part of these movies, but there were a couple of movies I was in. Probably Altered States is probably one of them, and Close Encounters certainly was. By Mad Magazine, where they do a whole graphic novel of the movie with your character, and it's great fun to see. And I think there was one of Altered States, as I remember it.
Yeah, this was the same guy who made Hardware Wars back, the Star Wars parody.
I heard of that, but never saw it.
Excuse me. I was a scientist before I became a bad actor. I know what that number is.
Well, what is it?
What is it? It's pi.
I guess keeping with sci-fi, I've got one more sci-fi question for you here. How did you decide to play the character that you did in 2010, the year we make contact?
I don't really know. But what I did do, which I don't always do on things, because it's not necessary, and sometimes I don't think you do it, I decided, in order to really know a little bit, because, special effects movies aren't always filled with personal detail about their characters. You sort of have to sketch that in. You're kind of more a function of a larger story being told that's usually about a machine or a war or a computer, or, it's not necessarily human-based. So I went and I studied with a guy named Joe Olive, I think was his name. His name was either Joe Green or Joe Olive. My mnemonic device was olives were green, but now I can't remember if his name was Joe Green or Joe Olive. He was a scientist at Bell Laboratories in New Jersey. The unit that he was in had literally invented the transistor, which was about like inventing computers, basically. And they were a tremendous hub of computer research. He worked in, my friend Joe, who was very helpful, worked in the field of voice recognition and artificial voices, basically, computerized speaking, which that's what HAL is. And I spent a couple of days in New Jersey with Joe and his band of interesting, wonderful scientists, and kind of got immersed a little bit in what it would be like if I really were the scientist that I was in 2010, and tried to pick up some stuff. So I got some ideas for the fact that I wanted a lot of cactus or growing things in my office or wherever my laboratory was, because my character I was studying, Joe, was very not the parody of what you thought a scientist would be. He loved opera. He had actually composed an opera for a computer to sing. He was very creative, and he wasn't just interested in numbers and math and being a scientist. He was very interested in the humanities. So a lot of, I studied him, I talked to him, I talked with him, we went around together, and I tried to bring whatever I could to the movie, so maybe that's in the movie, I don't know.
What was it like working on Bob Roberts?
I love Tim Robbins, he's a friend of mine. The experience was really interesting. It was a little bit improvised, I think, some of the things we did, but obviously there was a very nicely written and effective script. It was fairly quick. We were in Pittsburgh. Tim's wife, Susan Sarandon, was in Pittsburgh at the same time doing Lorenzo's Oil, a lovely movie with Nick Nolte, I think. And it was kind of family-like because everybody was there. And that's all I remember. I don't remember all that much about it. I was not a critical or important part of the movie, but it was fun. I really liked him, and I thought it was a really good movie. And it was fun being in Pittsburgh, although it's way too far away from New York. You think, oh, it's Pennsylvania, we'll just hop in a car and be home in 2 hours. But Pittsburgh's like an 8-hour drive or something. It's really far away. So that was the only part I didn't like. And I think it was very cold, but I'm not sure.
Speaking of improv, you've done a lot of films with Christopher Guest. Mm-hmm. How is that? Is that a typical experience for you, being able to improv that much on screen, or is it usually more locked down?
Yeah, no, it usually never happens. There are times when you might have a section in Gosford Park, which I produced and was in, that Robert Altman directed and produced also. My character was on a telephone a bit of time in the movie, and at that point, Altman just said, just make it up. Just say stuff you would be just saying to Hollywood when you were calling Hollywood in 1932. And I did. And I probably, it was fun and I liked it, and some of it's, for me, for my part, my favorite part of the movie. I mean, of things I was doing. And I really do like doing it. But it almost never happens. I studied it I studied, as I said, with Viola Spolin at Second City in Chicago when I was a child. But mostly never got to use it. Sometimes in a play, I've been in a lot of plays, we do it as a rehearsal technique sometimes, but then it goes away. When I auditioned for the movie The Midnight Cowboy, which is one of the first movies I'd done, my audition literally consisted of, here's John Voight, you're this kid, he's stealing your watch, you've just gone down into the movie theater, and you don't want him to take your watch because your mother will get really mad because she gave it to you. He's a hustler on Times Square. And my audition consisted of, I never read the book or the script or anything, just improvised out. And it's always been the most fun, easiest thing in the world for me to do, because you're all on the same footing with everybody. Everybody's just listening and talking, and it's very relieving for me to be able to make things up or live through the circumstances. I find it easier than the other kind of acting. I've always enjoyed it. Now, in Christopher Guest movies, there is no dialogue written, and in some cases, it is a nice amount, a fair amount of, this is what happens in this scene in the Bible, because it's not a script, it's a kind of a treatment. And sometimes it just says, Bob and Jim and Stuart and Howard are there and Jane, and they're all talking about the show. And that's as much as it says, and they turn the cameras on and we don't rehearse, and we don't make decisions amongst ourselves or say, well, you'll say this and I'll say this. You literally, you're just your character and you're doing whatever occurs to you. It's tremendously fun and exhilarating and sometimes tedious and a little difficult, but for the most part, it's just really fun. And you get to be around these funny, wonderful people. I consider myself, funny by accident sometimes, like by reacting or what's happening, but I'm not a genius at thinking of funny things to do as some of Chris's entourage without appearing to exert any effort at doing this, just inherently say these amazing, funny, smart, interesting things that I just kind of stand there and go, oh, okay, well, I'll just have to have a reaction, but I can't initiate this exactly. And it's really fun. I adore it. I hope we do more of it. I don't know that we will. And yeah, I do like that part of things.
You have directed two of my favorite films, Between Parents and My Boyfriend's Back.
Okay, I'm laughing, but yes.
What was it like kind of making that transition to be in the director's chair on those?
Well, I've enjoyed directing very, very much. Let's just say in Parents, I was making a little independent movie in Canada with nobody watching too much or thinking about it and kind of doing whatever I wanted to do, casting whoever I wanted to cast. And then My Boyfriend's Back, I was making a movie for Disney, a very established Hollywood-type studio, which was the opposite in terms of freedom. But other than that, I had a fun time on both of them. So in one I played and was rather inventive and could do what I wanted, and the other one it was very by the numbers. But that's what happens. That's the difference between sometimes working in a studio and working in your own backyard. It's a big difference.
What are you working on now?
I'm in a play called A Delicate Balance on Broadway with John Lithgow and Glenn Close and Lindsay Duncan and Martha Plimpton and Claire Higgins. It's an Edward Albee play. We close in a month, and we're having a great time. We're on Broadway at the Golden Theater now. I've just finished shooting a miniseries as an actor for HBO called Show Me a Hero with Oscar Isaac, Catherine Keener, Alfred Molina, and Peter Riegert, and some other wonderful people. And I love it. It's for HBO. It'll be on, I guess, in the fall. And I'm hopefully preparing to direct a couple of movies and a TV series and a few other things that I'm working on.
Well, hey, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. It's a real honor to talk to you.
Well, thank you. Great to talk to you, too.